regulatory framework and the Fed's new operating framework. So because of this, they were able to see vulnerabilities. So I couldn't hardly get that word out. And then also pinpoint a new regulatory framework because liquidity had dried up. Now, for those who don't know, banks loan and borrow from one another overnight during overnight operations to have money to do business the next day. So those operations during the course of this repo scare, they were not able to do that because liquidity had dried up. They had a cash crisis. They had the demand for cash, but not enough cash. They didn't have enough supply. So the government intervened, pouring billions of dollars into that process. Now, where do you think, or the Fed intervened, pouring billions of dollars into that process? Now, where do you think the Fed got that money from? I'm gonna tell you where they got it from. They printed it. Again, as I said before, anytime we have a problem, we print ourselves out of it. So what does that in return do? It decreases the value of our currency each time we do that. Think about all the things I've talked about and the way that we've gotten out of it, especially since we've been a world reserve currency since Bretton Woods of 1944. After the gold standard, when we went through some issues, remember in the 70s when they had the gas crisis and the fuel crisis and things like that, and they had some issues happen economically. How do you think they got out of it? Well, anytime there was a financial issue from a banking standpoint, of course, you had a oil crisis and a gas crisis. So they had to deal with that in that way. But then, of course, you have this snowball effect, or you have this domino effect where, and you got to understand this relationship with oil. Oil dictates the market in every way, form, or fashion. Always has. For all intents and purposes, it probably always will. But how do you think anything that happened finance-wise, banking-wise, how do you think people got out of it? They printed themselves out of it. 2008 financial crisis. How do you think they got out of that? When they gave TARP money to the banks, when they bailed them out and in order to stabilize things, how do you think they got out of it? I'm going to tell you how they got out of it. They printed themselves out of it. That's when you see the rise of the term quantitative easing or quantitative tightening. Quantitative easing, putting more money into circulation. Quantitative tightening, taking money out of circulation, tightening things. This is where you get that terminology from. It's just a, should I say, digital way of doing it. Now let's carry on. So you had the repo scare on the tail end of a global pandemic. Now this is going to rattle your brain. This is going to really, really, really mess you up. Word on the street is that the repo scare of 2019, because liquidity had dried up, and from what I read, they said that the Fed contributed billions of dollars to the banks to free up liquidity. I read somewhere else that it was trillions of dollars to save certain banks and to bail certain banks out, almost similarly to what happened in 2008 financial crisis. It was basically another crisis of that magnitude or more of a magnitude that escaped people. Because why? Because they printed themselves out of it, and they were able to do it quick enough because they learned from the first time what they needed to do in order to get themselves out of it, unbeknownst to you and I. So what does that do? That decreases the value of our currency even more. Who knows how much money they printed? Because there are certain things out there, as far as information that's flying around, billions, some say trillions of dollars. Either way, that's a lot of money. That is scary. Global pandemic, liquidity crisis. Now, let's go to this again. As I said before, anytime you experience these type of crises or crisis, then you're going to have opportunity. For instance, 2008 financial crisis or 2008 Great Recession, market panicked, big drops in the market, everything was at a discount. If you could have gotten in on something, if you had money and you could have bought in hell, you could have done very well. 2020 COVID. When that happened, there were some things that were on stupid discounts during COVID, and you could have done very well. Crypto market had dropped. The regular retail stock market had dropped. Like, you could have really bought in with some crazy, crazy discounts. For instance, when I talk about the crypto market during that time, I believe I saw in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Bitcoin had went down to as low as $3,900 to $4,000 per Bitcoin. Let me say that again, $3,900 to $4,000 per Bitcoin. I remember talking to people about Bitcoin back in 2017, and just every year since then, even when it was at $4,000 a Bitcoin, it was like, man, that's too high. Could you imagine? And the thing about it is, you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can just buy part of one. You can buy fractional shares, so to speak, or fractional units of a Bitcoin. You don't have to get a whole one. You can get 0.1 Bitcoin. You can get 0.01 Bitcoin. You don't have to get a whole one. But the thing about it is, guys, just think if you had 0.1 Bitcoin, what that would be worth right now when Bitcoin went up to $120,000 per Bitcoin, which is projected to go to $180,000 to $220,000 by the end of the year. Or you could teeter along the line between by the end of the year going into next year. They're talking about $1 million per Bitcoin. And then going up to 2030, they're talking about it could be over $1 million, $2-3 million per Bitcoin by 2030. Some projections I'm seeing. So you're talking about something that was at in 2020, when you had a crisis, when things dropped, you had the vid, and then you had big drops in the market. You could have gotten a Bitcoin at that point if you had it at $4,000, or you could have gotten a part of a Bitcoin for that amount. These are the opportunities you miss out on when you get scared or you let people scare you out of the market. Be fearful when people are greedy, and be greedy when people are fearful. That's the way you should look at things when you are an investor. That'll hit you at the right time when it's necessary. Okay, so we had that issue 2020. Then, along those lines, a lot of people don't know about this in particular, but this leads into 2022. Now, during 2022, because I was invested in this, so I could talk about it, you had a cryptocurrency called Terra Luna. Terra Luna was, you had the Terra Luna token, which was the native token of the Terra blockchain. But then you also had another side of it, which you had TerraUST, which was Terra Luna's version of a stablecoin. Now, the way this worked, as I would understand it, the Terra Luna native token worked as collateral, while the TerraUST was the coin that was pegged to $1. The collateral and the way they interacted, the collateral of the Terra Luna coin and the TerraUST or stablecoin, that collateral gave some stability to the stablecoin. Now, everything was fine as long as TerraUST was pegged to the dollar. Now, this leads into the next issue of that. It was said that Sam Bankman-Fried and Alameda Research was responsible for doing manipulation in order to keep things going for Terra Luna, in order to keep the stability on the UST side, in order to keep the collateral where it needed to be for the Terra Luna native token. Alameda Research and Sam Bankman-Fried did their market manipulation in order to keep that going. But at some point, ladies and gentlemen, the TerraUST stopped being pegged to the dollar. At that point, everything fell apart. Now, for me, I made a nice little piece of change off of it because I got out at a certain time, but then I bought back in when everything dropped dramatically. And when I got in, when it dropped like that, which was a big risk, it done pretty decent for me. But then I got out again. Now, this started a domino effect that led to the collapse of FTX, which was Sam Bankman-Fried's company, the collapse of Alameda Research, and the arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried. Now, this leads into another thing that happened in 2002, where you had big banks and the New York Fed start a 12-week pilot with the digital dollar. Let me say this again for the people in the back. On the tail end of Sam Bankman-Fried being arrested and the collapse of FTX, the collapse of Terra Luna and Terra Luna's stablecoin, TerraUST, before that, you had big banks, several of them, and the New York Fed start a 12-week pilot on the digital dollar. Coincidence? Coincidental? I don't think so. You need to understand something. These people in power and that have these connections, that have these decades and decades of head start over you, they are well connected and powerful. They don't just do anything just to do it. And when they decide to do something, they plan years ahead of time. So in my opinion, I don't think it's coincidental that along the tail end of Sam Bankman-Fried being arrested and his company collapsing, which manipulated the market for a blockchain called the Terra blockchain and Terra Luna native coin, which did a operation to where they had a stable coin that was pegged to the dollar and the Terra Luna native coin providing that liquidity, and providing that collateral. that they were able to keep that going for so long? Were the powers that be watching that and saying, with a regulatory framework, with some tightening up in places, I see how that could work. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking too far outside the box. Now, on the tail end of Sam Bankman-Fried being arrested in 2022, from 2022 until 2023, the Fed had some aggressive rate hikes. Some aggressive rate hikes from 2022 to 2023. The reason they had these rate hikes was to combat inflation. Inflation was not at a good clip. And during the whole Biden administration, which Biden was third worst in history when it comes to inflation amongst presidents, the top three would be Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, President Obama. Those are the particular presidents that kept inflation at a good clip and kept inflation under control. And fourth would be President Donald Trump, that were able to keep inflation at a good level. During the Biden administration, inflation got a little bit out of control. And so the Fed had to do some aggressive rate hikes. Now, for those that don't know, anytime the Fed has to do these aggressive rate hikes, it causes problems. Well, what are those problems? Well, one of the things you can look at is it leads to a devaluation of long-term securities held by banks, which can lead to liquidity issues. Now, when I talk about long-term securities, I'm talking about something that it would be maybe treasury. It would be something of that nature that would be considered to be long-term securities. And anytime you have aggressive rate hikes, it leads to a devaluation of those long-term securities and a dry up in liquidity. That is a major problem when it comes to banking and finance. When you have those type of things happen, then it could come upon times where the Fed may have to print money to start some liquidity, or print money to where institutions or banks or anything of that nature may need some liquidity or collateral or whatever the case may be. The Fed will have to print that money. And again, each time you print and print and print, then that's going to cause devaluation as well. So, 2022 to 2023. Now, in 2023, you had several bank failures, several big bank failures that came on the tail end of this devaluation of long-term securities and dried up liquidity.